Carol, this information is coming from a law enforcement source speaking to CNN, and this source has detailed knowledge of the investigation. We've been telling you about Andreas Lubitz's depressive episode back in 2009, but this source is telling us that he had a very serious relapse late last year, a relapse of severe depression, and as you mentioned, he started doctor shopping, desperately trying to find somebody who could help him, seeing 5 or perhaps 6 doctors and being prescribed what we are told is very heavy medication to treat the depressive symptoms that would have seriously impaired his ability to fly. Now, given that we know that Andreas Lubitz had dreamed of being a pilot from the time he was a teenager, was very afraid of losing his pilot's license, investigators believe that he was not taking this medication, not taking the medication to treat his psychological problems because he wanted to stay in the cockpit. He wanted to keep working. In fact, a pilot that flew with him just one day before the Germanwings Flight 9525 went down said that Lubitz seemed completely normal and was able to function in the cockpit normally. Obviously very disturbing, Carol. The doctors knew that he was unfit to fly. They gave him notes saying that he was unfit to fly, but those notes were found torn up in his apartment. He was apparently thinking that he could hold everything together. And so now the question becomes, was he planning this, or was he in the midst of some sort of episode at the time of the crash? That's what investigators are looking at right now, but very disturbing, Carol. And German privacy laws would not have allowed his doctors to inform Lufthansa, his employer, that all this was happening. He would have had to self-report, and we know that just didn't happen in this latest case. Carol?
And going back to one point that you made, Will, law enforcement source with detailed knowledge of the investigation doesn't think Lubitz was using that heavy medication while he was working because they interviewed him the day before he flew and said this Lufthansa employer, a Germanwings employee who interviewed him, said that Lubitz seemed completely normal with no problem whatsoever. So he hid things well, or what do you make of that?
He did hide things very well, Carol. And keep in mind, remember, his longtime girlfriend, who he had known since he was in high school when they were growing up together and working, he was working at Burger King, she was even unaware of the extent of what he was going through. She knew that he had psychological problems and perhaps even knew that at least 2 doctors had told him that he was unfit to fly. However, she thought that he was going to be okay, that they would be okay as a couple. And so we have an instance here where on the surface, people who interacted with Andreas Lubitz believed that everything was fine. And yet we paint now this increasing picture of someone who internally was so troubled and falling apart, trying desperately to hold it all together. Certainly, he had no business being in a cockpit on that day with 149 lives in his hands.